Hi, folks. It's Professor Diffley again. Part 4 here of Unit 3. This will be the last one. So, origins of American slavery. The causes of American slavery were mostly economic. Got to remember, even though we don't see it that way, this was economic things for them. So, why go to slaves? Your choice is use an indentured servant, which gets free after a while, and you got to pay him at the end and give him freedom dues and land. You can pay people, or you can use slaves. They chose, slaves, and that is really the really economic causes. The others, they're plantation based, so that's why you see it partly in other areas of the country, not so much in New England. Farming was made for, you can use slaves because you need lots and lots of hands, that sort of thing. So it's small farming, but this is plantation, large-scale farming. That's what they're doing. English and Africans. Generally the English see themselves as better than just about everybody else. Their view of foreigners. They had anti-black views, but it's not full-on racism as we would understand it today. It was more the idea they saw, just Africa as a lesser, the countries and peoples within the African continent as lesser. That will come later, modern racism, where it's about skin color, that sort of thing. This is the start of it, but it wasn't, they didn't automatically have the beliefs we have today. So why use Africans? Why not use the Native Americans? Well, we saw the English wanted to move them, get rid of them. They sold them off to slavery anywhere else. English wanted land above everything else. They wanted to expel, remove the Indians, and then use the land themselves. Why move to Africans then? Well, the way the English saw it, we had a lot of people fighting for their rights throughout England and the colonies, saying we're English, we're entitled to some inalienable rights, which is where we get the idea. So they looked at the African continent and said they're not European, they're especially not English, so they do not deserve the traditional rights of Englishmen. They're not protected. So from a legal standpoint, they argued you could use them as slaves. Slavery's been around forever. Originally slavery was more of a punishment for a crime, capture in war, punishment for debt. It was not perpetual. You served a term, and you were free. Indeed, we'll see this when we get to the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment in the United States outlaws all but one form of slavery in the United States. One form of slavery that is actually in the amendment is that for punishment of crime. So that means they can put you in prison, use you to work, that sort of thing. That was traditionally it. Same thing was going on in Africa. There had been slavery in Africa for a long time. Sometimes, often the only people you did enslave were the people co-religionists. So Muslims would enslave non-Muslims, Christians, non-Christians, that sort of thing. So slavery had been around forever. What's going to change is how large it becomes here in the Americas, all of the Americas, and how racially or skin color based it really does become, and it creates these views we have of people, or had of people as inferior because they looked a certain way. And that's really what we saw here. It's going to be massive, much bigger than usual, again, and it's very different. Here, slavery was forever. Another big thing was the child of a slave becomes a slave, so it's self-perpetuating, that sort of thing. So this is very, very different than you had slavery in the rest of the world. Let's move on to the next one here. And that was the big rice and sugar, and then later tobacco. You can see here cutting sugar cane in the Caribbeans, in Antigua. Very, very difficult, dangerous work. And why was sugar the first big consumer good? If you had sugar, it makes everything better. Sweeter, that's the whole thing. You could drink coffee easier, tea, all sorts of things. So that's why sugar became the major first big consumer good. Other stuff, development of American slavery here. So one of the things you had was this international slave trade because of the mass-marketed consumer goods. We'll see a lot more of that in the next chapter, where we'll delve totally into the Atlantic system of economics and trade and slave trading. But mass-marketed consumer goods coming from plantations. So you need lots of them. Think tobacco, think sugar, think rice, things like that. Slavery in the West Indies. Again, they used Native Americans at first, but they eventually die off from diseases. and so they eventually begin to use Africans. It's actually the West Indians, what we would call the Caribbean region today. So West Indies is usually Jamaica, places like that. Actually, more slaves are going to be imported and forced to work and live in the Caribbean than in the entirety of the United States. I know from the American perspective we see it here, but actually more slaves ended up in the Caribbean, even Brazil, than they did, enslaved Africans than they did in the Americas. But we'll talk about that next week. Growth of slavery in America, what becomes America, we talked about this already, plantations, lack of indentured servants, and lack of indentured servants because people didn't want to do it anymore. You had to pay them, and it's economic causes. Another thing too, with skin color, this is part of it. Think about this: if you're indentured servants, they can't really run away. They'll be, they can run away. They can blend in. They're the same skin color. They're Englishmen usually, right? So they're Northern European. They look a certain way. Africans, when you make all Africans in America at this point slaves, well, it becomes default that they are slaves, and so skin color this allows it there. Race and law, that's what they had with the drawing of the color line. Really look at the notes for this one. The color line was they had to decide who is black and who is not. So, like, what if it's mixed? White and black parent, white and Indian, black and India, all those. And so they decided, in many places that any African ancestry ended up being slaves. In America, it becomes the child. If your mother was a slave, if you're born of your mother and she's a slave, you're a slave. So that's the way it ends up being passed down. But again, the color line is that idea of a white and black. This becomes chattel slavery. Chattel slavery means property. So again, these people became property. Again, I know that's difficult to understand for us, but that's the way they looked at it. What can you do with your property? Whatever you want. And unfortunately, that's going to be brutal here. But we're going to look at that again in more detail. I talked about the hereditary slave laws. And then when you really see this is Virginia in 1705, it's becoming a slave society where it finally gets slave laws or black codes. There's one set of laws for whites, one set of laws for blacks, black folk, Africans. Eventually what happens here is it's all around, it's white supremacy, let's just put it that way. That becomes enshrined in law. Whites have more privileges, more rights, Africans had, and African Americans in their sense, had very little, and that's what you start to see here with the Virginia Slave Code of 1705. But that is the clear sign that they've become a slave society rather than a society with slaves, right? Rather than just having a few. There's so many of them, they need specific laws to make sure whites were better in front of the law, in a better position in front of the law than Africans and African Americans. And here's another depiction of a sugar mill. Rise of Chesapeake. We see that a lot in the Chesapeake is the Virginia, Maryland area where they're growing tobacco. More and more slavery needed there, and so you're going to have it there. But one of the things that happens is this Bacon's Rebellion, and a lot of this is in the notes, the full details. But essentially, this is a fight partly between the poorer whites and the landed planters. Governor Berkeley of Virginia was corrupt. He had all his buddies, had the best land, all the power, and they had very little ability to for anybody else to vote. So poorer whites, and we're talking even middle class ones, are again pushed further and further out of Virginia. So they're becoming upset by that. And the way it become that because the plantation owners took up all the land, they had no land to give to their indentured servants. And so indentured servants became, forced to work after they were released as tenant farmers. And so that led to even less and less indentured servants. Eventually, Bacon rises up. He's a populist. He plays to the regular people. Right, says he's going to get them land, he's going to make sure they take the Indian land, that sort of thing. Bacon leads a rebellion, again, most of this in the notes, leads a rebellion, tries to take over. Eventually the British come with their warships and take out the rebellion, but before that they burn Jamestown, the rebels do. Bacon establishes himself as the head of the government there. What do you see after this? An increase in slavery. Why? Because a lot of the people fighting behind Bacon were angry indentures, former indentured servants. So they said, all right, no more indentured servitude, and let's create the slave society. Let's import more Africans because they're not entitled to our laws, and we don't have to give them everything, is essentially it. But again, this is described in the notes there. But this really does, this really does help increase slavery, unfortunately, is Bacon's rebellion here. Just how widespread slavery was. That was even on handkerchiefs. This is Berkeley. Again, there's other political crises in the colonies here. You have the Glorious Revolution in England. So people go on that. The Glorious Revolution is a bloodless revolution where William, the Dutch prince, takes over. In England, you have an English Bill of Rights, an origin of our Bill of Rights. You have this Glorious Revolution. What happens is, in England, in London, they start the Lords of Trade, and they really start to try to take. Now that everything's settled in England, they try to make sure that the colonies are doing what they're supposed to. So they are angry that Massachusetts is ignoring the Navigation Acts. The Parliament says you have to follow these are the rules of the empire. Massachusetts says, well, we don't have representatives, so you can't tax us. That's a key term later. And we're not going to follow your laws. So the king gets rid of all the charters and the colonies and combines them into the super colony of the Dominion of New England. This picture on the left here is about Connecticut and the charter oak. If you're from Connecticut, you've seen it. That's their motto, the charter oak. It's their tree. When the British government came to take their charter, their constitution, someone hid it in an oak tree so that they couldn't take it. So that this way, if they overthrew the British there, they would have their charter back. And that's why it's called the oak tree straight and the charter oak. But yeah, this creates this massive new colony. That you have no more representative governor. It's being run by London. And obviously they did not like that in New England. Here's the charter oak. Again, this new Massachusetts colony. Once this is over, once they get rid of the English, eventually Sir Andros, the governor, is overthrown. People hope that the colonies would be put back exactly like they were, but instead they combine Mass Bay and Plymouth into one new colony. Now, why is that important? Because the Toleration Act, you had to let all Protestants and pretty much Christians, except for mostly Catholics, have a say. So that is the end of the Bible Commonwealth, where the Puritans, who had thought they were going to create this religious-based society in New England, they lost in that way because now they were outnumbered, significantly outnumbered going forward. So there's lots of changes, but you can see a lot of this in here is already divisions between who gets to call the shots in the Americas. Is it the colonist or is it Parliament? Already, again, Massachusetts says you can't tax us unless you give us representation. That will be a rallying cry of the revolution. The other stuff here, prosecutions and witches, there's stuff on the website for this and in the slides. Make sure you take a look at that. I'm not going to go too much into the Salem witch trials. I will say, though, again, for this will be a discussion board, but this was mass hysteria. And again, that's it. You can see it there. See notes and that. And unfortunately, they killed lots of people. Other thing here, growth of colonial America. Diverse population. What do we mean by diverse? In this case, we mean just not English. So you can see a lot of the most Europeans coming are Irish and German here. Notice the Africans, they are there. They're mostly in the South. They are slaves, though, almost all of them. But you have all these others coming in. What was attracting settlers? Economies, changing circumstances, wars in Europe, the chance to be in Pennsylvania where you could be free in different religions, so lots of people came there. And you have massive, massive amounts of Germans coming. They will be one of the largest. In fact, today, more people can claim German heritage than any of the other European heritages. That's how long they've been here and how far they went. The religious diversity means they're different Christians. Germans will create the first German immigrant neighborhoods, immigrant communities. Some will become, adopt English, others won't. But you can see some of this in the notes as well. Another one. Again, more settlements here. Social classes in the colonies. Check the websites on these. These are really good ones. Make sure you read that. And these are from Williamsburg colonial, colonial recreation site. So check those out. So that is the last of this. Again, for witchcraft and for. For witchcraft, there's also another video on there just generally about witchcraft, but there's Salem. There is the websites on social class. Essentially what happens about social class is that things become much more varied. You start to get very rich, you get some middle, and then poor people. But it'll talk about it in the website. All right, that is it for Unit 3. As always, you got questions, email me. All right, thanks. Good luck with all this. I'm sure you're going to rock it. Later. Bye.